wear Black Power Media gear, you can accomplish anything. You can play any and every position. Coaching, to kicking, to receiving, to running and juking. And, oh, my goodness. Let's see that again in slow motion. Get off me. And you're going to have a lot of haters coming at you, but what you got to do is you got to shake them off, and get to your goal and accomplish it. And when that's done, it's a beautiful thing. I'm talking about going hard, extra, for that extra point. And when it's done beautifully, you talking about touchdown. Oh, and the crowd goes wild and they're celebrating with you and everything. Man, let's see that again. Nice.
Black Power Media, baby. That's how we do it.
Now go to blackpowermedia.org and get you some of that gear. Empower yourself today.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome once again back to I Mix What I Like right here at Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, very happy to be your host. We're going to get right back into it with Dhoruba bin-wahad in just a minute, but want to invite everybody to make sure you like, share, subscribe, join the channel if you can, support the Patreon if you can. Make sure that you go to blackpowermedia.org and you're all caught up there, where you can find links to all ways to donate, support, and more. And if you're not able to contribute financially, that's cool. We get it. No problem. Just like, share, put this in your socials, contribute that way, comment, do all of those things.
Put it in the comments.
All of that helps. So please do all of those immaterial things to support this program and the platform itself. By the way, I've added I created a playlist for this Dear Mama series discussion, which is now linked in the show description. So if you missed any of the episodes in this series with Dhoruba and some of the respondents, please go check that out as well. And we'll keep that going as this discussion continues. So without further ado, let's bring Dhoruba back onto the platform. Welcome him once again. Dhoruba, it's always good to see you. It's a pleasure. Thanks for making yourself available and taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Jared. Thank you.
So if I can, there's a lot to get to that we can bring to it. The series predictably seems more or less finished with any discussion of almost of a feigning, to be honest, entirely, but certainly as her life dovetailed with the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Movement directly. So if I can, I'm going to quickly set the tone, and then there were some specific things as you and I talked off air that they mentioned in the series that I would like for you to comment on specifically. And again, just as a reminder to everybody, the whole point of this series has not been, of course, to invite Dhoruba to comment on what he has not watched in terms of the series, but to comment on aspects of the series that I'm sharing with him and others that are mentioned in the series that are obviously not elaborated on or given appropriate context. So just real quick, episode, as I'm reminded with all of these, with episode 4 opening up, that not only is this on Hulu, a Disney product, an FX product, it is an Interscope Records product that we should be reminded of, as I was with this episode. That includes executive production credits going to Jamal Joseph, Nelson George as well. Less so with Joseph from my perspective, but Nelson George is a regular commentator on these histories involved in all of this. And I think it's logical that he would have been involved with this in also with keeping it focused as it was away from what we have Dhoruba here to talk about. They open up with him talking about Pac being in Dannemora prison, and that this becoming a turning point where he gets out, and instead of going as he had promised into a more cleaned up radical political direction, he gets pulled in the opposite direction by Suge Knight, who is given a bulk of the credit or blame for pulling Pac away from radical politics. And they even go into saying that it was, I thought they threw this line in there nicely as well, that Pac was going to finally attempt to, quote, realize the American dream, having grown up in so much poverty and relocation and all of this. Now he's coming out of prison. He's getting all this money from Suge Knight. He's getting all this welcome, the tension. He's getting this father figure from Suge Knight, and he goes in that direction. They play into a little bit of the media playing a role in the beef between the East Coast, West Coast thing. Afeni's sister, Glow, talks about Pac not really being a thug and a danger, but someone who was more into acting and portraying a role. Later, he's described again as a chameleon. They take a shot at C. Dolores Tucker, who I will continue to argue is correct in her initial, analysis, but we'll leave that for another time. And then they talk about, this is really sort of the brief moment in this episode where Dhoruba, that this is really where I was hoping we could have a conversation centered around this, because they make the point in this episode that after the acquittal of the New York 21, Pac is born, and Afeni and many of the Panthers involved in that trial and beyond go into sort of a devolution, a downward spiral, a post-traumatic stress disorder driven downward trajectory into which drugs emerge, struggles to find place to contribute politically. They talk about the entire movement getting involved with substance abuse, becoming broke and paranoid and depressed were words that were used to describe the situation. Afeni still continues to be an icon, they say, and a face of the movement. She has her relationship briefly with, or what was imposed or forced to be brief, with Mutulu Shakur. They talk a little bit about him opening up these clinics, or the one clinic. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to mute you for a couple more seconds while I just quickly finish this, and I'm going to stop talking. They talk about, again, there's no real discussion of the politics or any substantive discussion or detail. They just quickly run through this almost as fast as I'm doing it here. Afeni and Mutulu become a couple. He opens up a clinic. They mentioned Geronimo Pratt being Pac's godfather, and this relationship that he has in sort of indirectly keeping Pac connected to some sort of commitment to people in struggle. They make reference in an interview through Pac defending his godfather Geronimo to the counterintelligence program. And they talk about Pac being targeted as a movement child by police and FBI eventual harassment of his mother and other members of the party. Then they quickly talk about, I'm assuming because of Afeni's relationship with Mutulu, the Brinks 1981 Brinks armored car robbery. Did they mention David Gilbert? I don't think they mentioned David Gilbert by name. They mention, now I'm not sure if they mention anybody by name in terms of the Brinks armored car robbery. And then they just sort of suggest that living in Harlem and in poverty, the money that was expropriated from the Brinks armored car was distributed on Christmas to Black families in the community, but they make the juxtaposition to point out that Tupac and his household is poor, and he starts raising questions about why are we poor, and you start hearing him becoming critical of his mother, saying she cares more about the people than our people, than the family, and he starts to recognize this incongruity between what's going out for the cause and for the community and not coming back to his family. And in fact, they mention, I think it's Glow who points out, or maybe it's Pac, saying that Afeni tells him, I think Pac says this, that his mother tells him, don't trust the people, don't give your anything to the people, because they will turn their back on you. They can't be trusted. They kind of leave this, that kind of anti, political thing in the air a little bit to sort of ease, I think, the transition they're trying to make to Pac just going into full gangsterism and setting it up for the final episode where he's about to get killed in Vegas. No discussion, and they passingly make reference to Assata Shakur escaping. But no real discussion of who Asada is, what the nature of that was, just another name get referenced. So as I wrote here, no details, no discussion, just a quick reference to Brinks, money showing up at Christmas, Pac in poverty, PTSD. Don't ever give yourself to the people because they will use you, is the exact quote. I do have it here. Pac goes to the Baltimore School of the Arts, is referred to as a chameleon, and then that's basically it. So specifically, I then thought that gives us, that is for you and I and us to discuss some of these contextual pieces that were left out. And we could start anywhere you like, but specifically Asada's escape, Brinks, Geronimo Pratt, and Mutulu Shakur, recently released political prisoner. That they don't really mention anything like that. They don't say Mutulu at the time of this interview was still incarcerated as a political prisoner. They certainly don't update us to say he's been released. They don't. There's very little of that. There's certainly no discussion of the political, the stance taken for expropriation. Black Liberation Army isn't mentioned. None of this is done. So it's just all very in passing to sort of point us in the direction, as I've been suggesting, that this is really about Pac, not about Afeni, and they're setting it up to be, it's just another thug getting killed in the street, which is where I know you and I don't fully agree. But anyway, so let me stop there and let you pick up with anything that you like, and then we can go.
Well, as I think I pointed out earlier, for me to comment, more than perfunctorily on some of the things like the Brinks episode and that stuff, the freeing of Asada, I'll just say that towards the end of the 70s, as the effects of the counterintelligence program had morphed into the type of organizations and counter revolutionaries and reactionaries that you had running around at the time, starting programs, running for political office. At that time, the level of radicalism in the community amongst youth had hardly been completely eradicated, and so you had things. You had movements like the Dar Islam movement that blossomed in New York, that the U.S. State Department and intelligence agencies had to contrive an entire operation to destroy, to dismantle. These were African American Muslims for the main part, because at that time Islam was the fastest growing religion in America. Was Islam. Before 9/11, before the first World Trade Center and all of those things, Islam was the fastest growing religion amongst Black people and in the United States. Okay? And so with the destruction and the weakening of the human rights movement, the civil rights movement, and the Black Power movement, a lot of young people who came of age, turned to spiritual and alternatives to the Christian church and history that it had, and so a lot of young men and women became Muslims, Orthodox Muslims, and you have to remember too, this was subsequent to Malcolm's assassination, and the role that messianic movements had played in the Black community, long before the NOI, the Nation of Islam. So you've had a lot of trends that were going in the Black community that express various aspects of popularism and militancy, but not on the level that was suppressed during under under the counterintelligence program, and the magnitude that it had. And then you got to remember too that this period also launched the war on drugs, and and the militarization of the police began in earnest with the SWAT teams and the no-knock laws coming into effect. You see what I'm saying? So when Brinks came along, right? When Brinks came along, expropriation of government institutions and government and wealth by liberation movements was a common practice. Was something that was, I mean, you could even see in the tragic drama of Patty Hearst in the Sudanese Liberation Army, how she was caught on tape wielding a submachine gun, and then so this was a heiress to a fortune was flipped into revolutionary radical politics. And if you look at how that case was handled by the government and by the police, they evaluated the techniques that were used to flip Patty Hearst: isolation, hypnosis, different types of torture, you understand, so that she had an out-of-body experience and became, whatever revolutionary name she assumed at the time. You see, and this was in turn turned on to revolutionaries all during the 80s and the wars and the war on terror and all of these things. So what I'm trying to say is that to look at some incident like the Brinks episode, we have to see that there was a whole different police apparatus that was consolidating in place. There was the Joint Terrorist Task Force that began to manifest in terms of its actual existence and organization, the various programs that were implemented with the Black Desk and the Latino Desk under COINTELPRO. You see, but COINTELPRO was no longer the moniker or the cover. Now it was the Joint Anti-Terrorist Task Force, which included state police on all different levels, which included federal agencies, the DEA, which was newly formed at that time, and all of these things. So the police apparatus, the police state, was building itself up for anti-urban guerrilla warfare and to suppress minorities and militarize and keep in check black people. And so this campaign assumed many facets. When we talk about how the gangs evolved, when we talk about the development of gangs like the Crips and the Bloods and the Peace Stone Rangers and all of these different gangs and how they developed and how it became generational, and how that generational gang banging became tribal, and then illegitimate capitalism then institutionalized it amongst the lumpen proletariat, so that you had ghetto fabulous, you had illegitimate capitalist wealth. You see what I'm saying? That made Bumpy Johnson and old school gangsters look pathetic. You see? So all of these things were at work. So that's why I said, people don't fully understand, how the government began to capitalize off of the success of its counterintelligence program and the destruction of organizations like the Black Panther Party and RNA and the Puerto Rican Liberation Movement, the Chicano movement, and working class, militant working class unionization.
Dhoruba, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No,
yeah, no, I did want to ask. It just occurred to me we didn't talk about this before, but I did want to ask, given because some of the off the record stuff that we're talking about, hopefully that getting you to write a piece and and one of Mumia's attorneys and your attorney Bob Boyle is helping out in the background. Dr. Burton's helping out in the background. Shout out to them. Sending all these documents that I've been looking at last night, early this morning. What role when a series like this comes out and talks about sort of that post New York 21 trial devolution, the PTSD, the drug abuse, the depression, what role do you think the infiltration of the party played in all of that? Because I'm looking at these documents and there's a lot of it, obviously, but specific even to the chapter that you and Afeni were in, there were at least, I'm looking at here, there's at least 3, including Gene Roberts, infamously, at least 3 active from the moment you come into the party in 68 and get promoted to field secretary in 69. There's at least 3 undercover agents just in that chapter already doing their thing. And so and now the series doesn't talk about this. They mention COINTELPRO and Pox, in a tape of him in an interview, just passingly. They mention Assada's escape, but there's no discussion of the role of the state, the infiltration, so I'm just wondering, what do you think, to what extent could that be counted as part of the problem here that I'm at least suggesting the series does us a disservice by not mentioning?
Well, my experience was that is that the role that infiltration played by agents of the state, and there were many forms of infiltration and subversion of the Black Panther Party, not just police agents. The FBI had the snitch program. I forgot what they called it. They had a snitch program, a ghetto informant program, and they went around recruiting snitches on all levels, from token booth attendants to school teachers, to landlords to superintendents. You see, and they used that information. They gathered that information, and therefore they, in their view, they established the mosaic of a particular thing that they were looking at, so they could see how it was formed and how it worked. This is how they began their whole anti-Semitic a program called Dear Irving, writing letters to Jewish members of the Communist Party and Jewish philanthropic contributors to the Civil Rights Movement and to the Black Panther Party, talking about how the Black Panthers were anti-Semitic and hated Jews, and that we were crypto-Nazis and fascists.
There was a whole academic wing of this too, by the way. We have somewhere I have a famous, I'm forgetting the name, a very famous Jewish historian has a book on the history of Jews in the United States, and the one reference to the Panthers in the book is that the Panthers were just an anti-Semitic organization, just threw in there, no discussion. So yeah, anyway, I just sorry to cut you off. Just thought that.
Well, and it's no coincidence, as a consequence, that in New York, as the Ocean Hill-Brownsville a conflict erupted with the United Federation of Teachers over community control, black community control of this experimental school district that bordered on Ocean Hill-Brownsville, that bordered on the Jewish community there. The relationship between the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, and
the ADL too. So in there, the ADL was in there infiltrating, doing all kinds of stuff.
The JDL were the thugs and hard heads with skull caps on the street and the long coast that was beating people, and there was an incident where a black kid was run over, and I believe he was killed, and the hit and run driver fled into the Jewish community, and he was hotly pursued by black people, enraged by this hit and run driver, and the police came out. JDL came out and protected this kid. He wasn't even subsequently arrested, really. In fact, he was spirited off to Israel, and that was the last you've ever heard of him. And so a whole lot of incidents grew out of that. And one incident, and even involved the JDL coming to Harlem in a couple of vans and jumping out in front of the Harlem office on 7th Avenue, trying to picket the Black Panther Party office, talking about we were Nazis and Jew haters and all of this stuff. And so it was about like a dozen of them, or 15 of them, or 20 of them, or whatever. So big, big brawl ensued, and they exited, hastily in their vans from that demonstration. But things. What I'm trying to say is that the Black Panther Party, as a grassroots organization, was always portrayed by the ruling class and the ruling elites, whether they were the absentee landlords who were predominantly Jewish in New York City. We all know what the real estate in a sector who dominates it in New York City. And even Trump, with his racist ass, came out and mentioned how he didn't need Jewish landlord money in order to do what he wanted to do in New York. So that's one thing. Then we see that the majority of these absentee landlord slums are in underserved Black and poor communities, you see, and that don't have infrastructure, that don't have sanitation, that don't have hot water, all of these things. So the Black Panther Party, along with other grassroots organizations, had no alternative but to struggle for the rights of tenants to occupy decent housing and all of these things. And I might add that the success of that struggle, those tenant rights struggles, was eroded by the way the state went about criminalizing mental health, closing down mental health institutions, criminalizing unemployment. You see, till we have this booming homelessness rate, and we have in cities tens of thousands of apartments sitting vacant with high rents, and so there's a housing crisis. I just wanted to say all of that to say that the Black Panther Party at that time had real concrete struggles that it had to confront on a daily basis from its very inception. So the infiltration of police agents, whether they were into labor unions, which the police infiltrated, whether it was into the religious organizations like the various Muslim organizations, or whether it was into the schools and amongst students. We know how the police, the article I sent you, remember the article I sent you? It was lifted whole cloth from the FBI intelligence.
Oh man, I mean,
run that down, and this goes to what I was saying about the veracity of how someone could say that what was happening to us was like a shock to them. And nobody knew what was happening. When you can see right there, the FBI is documenting the emotions and the feedback that even the brothers in the prison was having towards us on the outside, Afeni included. You see, but yeah, run down that part I was there, because I mentioned that on this previous show.
Which part are you talking about?
Why we absconded at when we did,
right? And so there was a question. So yeah, in episode 3, it's left that you and Cedewayo abandoned Afeni and Joan Bird, and what was said by Glow, Afeni's sister, to be Afeni's greatest betrayal. And and then in the book with Jasmine Guy, who is featured in that same episode, Afeni refers to you and Cedewayo in much harsher language that I even have trouble saying to you in front of your face, because it's just it's just so seemingly impossible that someone could conclude that. But in these documents, it's at least there's a number of things, and I don't know if there's something specifically that I'm missing that you wanted, but it's very clear that the FBI is, not only do they have informants, but they are they're saying we can take advantage of all of this. We can target counterintelligence operations against the I think they were saying the Eldridge factor versus the Huey faction versus the Eldridge faction, because there was more disunity, and there's something to that effect. And now I can't, and I'm trying to find the exact one here, but yeah,
well, they were talking, but you remember what I told you when I was talking about how when David first came to New York and they wanted to close down the New York chapter, I said,
right,
you can't do that, man, because of the history of New York. You see, if you look at the documents and you look at how the FBI saw that Robert Bay and those people they sent to New York were ill-suited for New York because they viewed it as like the den of cultural nationalism. They didn't know what was going on. You see what I'm saying? And the FBI played on that. And they played on that to the point where because of my trying to represent the interests of the political prisoners in the 21, that they were able to convince the brothers in prison that I was doing the complete opposite.
Right.
And remember, I told you how the first thing that was done was that the Panther 21 Defense Committee and its resources was moved to the West Coast when Bobby stepped into that trap up in New Haven. You see.
So trying to find my notes here to compare with what I'm showing on the screen, but this document here, I know it's hard for folks to see, but this document here is from March 27th, 1970. And one of the things that I noted it says in here is that they want quote, a continual flow of information for dissemination to quote, outside agencies in terms of what was all happening with the 21 and the trial, saying that it was of vital interest not only to the Bureau, but to additional government agencies and officials. So there was a real concern about what you all were accused of doing and what was going to happen in the trial. Let's see, I had asked if you could say, I was talking about Robert Bay and Doug Miranda, who are talked about in here. I don't know if you want to talk about, let's see. I wrote here, I think, highlighting the doc with complaints about, oh, right, because this is where they're also talking about how this document or these documents are also talking about how you were complaining, which is not made clear, I think, in the series, but you were complaining that money that was supposed to be being raised to the 21 was going to California and not being put to the proper use for the 21. And I don't think it's, if I remember correctly, it seems like that was not made very clear in the series. It was left that that you and others were out not doing the work on behalf of bringing money and attention to the 21 that were still locked up. But the FBI at least is saying quite the opposite, that you're out here advocating and complaining that the party is not distributing the money properly.
Well, you see, if you read the overview that Bob Boyle sent you, that I paid attention to, he puts in chronological order how the FBI had an informer that visited members of the 21 that were in prison and fed them just information about about what was happening on the outside, how people were disgruntled and it was purged from the party if they ever spoke up, and all of this stuff, right? And the person that they fed it to, you know, unfortunately, um, was a person that really didn't have any type of any type of party discipline about himself or his politics. He was just somewhat eccentric. You know, and so he would go back to the brothers in the joint and say, "Yeah, man, this Robert Bay is doing this and that, Thomas Jolly's doing that, and all the money is going here and all the money is going there." And so when we would come in on a visit, a legal conference, Afeni, all of us, you know, that Lumumba and these brothers would, start talking about, man, how are you gonna let people do this and do that? And I'm trying to explain to them what the politics of this is, how we're trying to expand the Central Committee. And you remember I mentioned that we were trying to make the Central Committee more democratic,
Right.
so that was all part of the push, along with the fact that the funds were being diverted or used on a strategic level, perhaps, that negated the tactical efficacy of the struggle around the 21, because the 21 was the premier conspiracy case of that time. At that time, you see, and it was a case that was aimed directly at all black defendants. You see, and unlike the Chicago 7 conspiracy case, where they bound and tied and gagged Bobby, the chairman of the Black Panther Party, during the conspiracy trial.
Just quickly, I just wanted. This is one of the more legible ones where they're saying Dhoruba complained that it is common knowledge that sums of money have been raised specifically for the defense of the New York 21 and subsequently utilized for other projects outside the New York area. The committee to defend the Panther 21 was lagging in their efforts to raise needed bail money. Dhoruba recommended that in future, certain percentage of all monies raised be earmarked for imprisoned New York Panthers. So that it's always it's an awkward contradiction to rely on the FBI to contradict a Disney product, but it's like using one enemy to disprove another enemy. But these are the contradictions we find ourselves in.
Yeah. Good. I mean,
no. That was it. Go ahead. I'm just scrolling to find.
So what I'm saying is, then there's the contradictions, that people see when they see something, they come to a simplistic a conclusion about let's just say the contradiction between the international section and Oakland, and I laid out some of that, and I think I mentioned some of that to you before we started talking about how Huey's manipulation and Huey's understanding of events were
sorry, go ahead.
Were not diverted but perverted, and how people around him felt increasingly victimized by that, and how the FBI knew this, and so they knew who would be effective and who wouldn't. And if you notice, I don't know if you read it, when they realized that I was between the devil and the deep blue sea, in terms of my comrades in the joint wanting me to believing that I was collaborating against them and the political and their interests, and those on the West Coast who felt that they was being threatened by myself and others here on the East Coast. They felt, the FBI felt, well, okay, this is an excellent time to
Yep.
come and holler at homeboy and see if he wanted some money, and if he wanted to get him a little, do a little dance, sing a little song,
Oh, that
get
part.
down.
Now that part, I'm not sure now that part, maybe I misunderstood what you were talking about there.
Well, they had, the FBI put out a memo to give him my position and give him and give him the type where I was at. The Panther 21 is about to release this memo, and that I asked them not to do. And
you talking about the one saying that the Weather Underground was the leadership of the revolution? Yeah.
And they were about to do that, and then and so they said, okay, this is the time to approach this man and see if he want to work for us, if he wants to be an informant.
So is this the one? Is this part of what you're talking about here? Because this one is talking about a source that stated that you and others have been labeled jackanapes and pigs by the BPP, and according to the source, was pegged as a threat to the life of Huey Newton. That being you were a threat to Huey. Is this?
That was the prelude. That was no, that's afterward.
Okay.
The timeline is different. Remember when the piece that I gave you, where the New York Post said 2 missing Panthers feared dead? Okay, that right there, you see how it talks about a threat to Huey's life and all of that stuff. That's connected to that. But no, what I was talking about was the beginning before that. You see, long before that, and that starts with the desire of the party, or the desire of individuals on the party, to change the direction of the Black Panther Party from a potentially revolutionary, working and grassroots organization capable of developing its own mechanisms of public safety and public public electoral expression, into just another anti-poverty organization, just another struggling organization on the street, trying to get a grant here, running elected officials there, becoming, part and parcel of the Democratic Party alliances of progressives, to be neoliberals, just like Elaine Brown and Bobby Seale were when they try to run for office, and use the history and the respect that people in the Oakland Bay area have for the party, to use that to get into elected office. Whereas the revolutionary wing of the Black Panther Party, that the FBI, you see, created the label of the Cleaver faction. They manufactured that, and they applied.
And this right here is saying the New York office, aware of the wealth of material now present for various counterintelligence proposals that will submit a separate teletype regarding COINTELPRO. As the Bureau is aware, prior COINTELPRO concerning letter to Eldridge Cleaver from New York Panther 21 now appears to have the possibility of great impact at this time. New York office will send this letter to Cleaver on February 10th, next after this expulsion situation is completely analyzed by the New York office. So this is them explaining that they're doing operations against the Cleaver faction and sending letters on behalf of the 21 to the Cleaver faction. But
the importance of this is that just at that point, when the Black Panther Party was about to cleave and the cleavage was ideological. It was not just about, some people just wanting to run around and wave guns around and all of this shit. When Huey came up with that survival pending revolution, it was a clear surrender to COINTELPRO. It was a clear surrender to the war on poverty that was enacted. That war on poverty was in fact the basis for poverty pimps and black capitalism.
But let me ask you about this, Dhoruba, because I and many of us, I think, have missed this point, because we've made reference to that phrase survival pending revolution to mean that it was acknowledged that these were not revolutionary actions, but they were just to survive pending revolution. But you're saying that that is itself a capitulation that with a distinction that could have never been understood. So we should have just abandoned that from your perspective. We should never.
Absolutely. It was misinterpreted. And the reason why it was misinterpreted, because it was a surrender to the white supremacist armed agents of the state. It was a surrender to them, letting them know it was no longer necessary to come at us with SWAT teams. It was no longer necessary to talk about we're going to advocate for decentralization of police and community control of public safety. It's no longer necessary to talk about that we have a right to self-defense and that we have a right to maintain a well-armed militia in our community when the state evisions are designed to murder and kill us and subjugate us and all of this. The only people that said that was the Black Panther Party. And the only people that embraced the idea of protracted war and revolutionary armed struggle was the Black Panther Party. And the contradiction in that was not that the contradiction was that the wing of the party that embraced that had an incorrect analysis of white supremacy and the armed agents of the state and how you had to resist it. The contradiction in that was to create a mass movement, an organized movement of masses of people coming from different parts of our community, led by the most revolutionary class in that movement, the disenfranchised, those who have nothing, those who are in the bottom, and those who are in the bottom who have a class analysis and understanding that we do have power in our community, that all politics is local, that we can take control of our local communities. What's point number one? We want control of the Black community, you see? But the way to go about doing that in a society that has developed a whole historical system and institution and panoply of power based on our domestic colonization. We're a domestic colony. So to embrace the idea and the notion of armed self-defense and community control of our community is an anti-colonial construct in the context of the white supremacist construct in America. You got to remember that the so-called citizenship that was deferred on Black people and emancipation was not something that we decided in a referendum. It was not something that Black people came together and was talked about in town halls and then we voted on it. No, we were thanking Jesus. He just said it'd be all right if I changed my name. If I changed my name and took on the slave master, he would still recognize I was still that soul that was on the plantation. So we tried to assume the type of legal and cultural and existential and ontological wardrobe of Americanism of a white supremacist construct. It's like a brother just wrote me in an email saying that all the constitutions, like in Ghana and in former colonial states and their laws and the organization of their laws and penalties is a continuation of colonial rule under the guise and pretense that they're independent, that these are the institutions of law and order, you see. So my point is that the Black Panther Party was on the verge of being considered just another welfare agency. We was just out there giving out clothes. That's what we was supposed to do. We was running health clinics. That's what black folks, in college, they got one medical. That's what they do. They go volunteer. We sweep the streets. That's what we was a social welfare agency. You see. But we wasn't on nobody's books. And if you notice, all of the programs of the Black Panther Party in which we developed and tried to meet certain needs of the people all became adopted by the state. The free lunch programs, the busing programs, all of these things became developed by or co-opted by the states. You see. So my point is that when Huey said survival pending revolution, this wasn't saying that we have to survive America, because if he was saying that, he would be talking about self-determination in the black community. He would have been talking about community control of the police. He would have been talking about community control of public safety and health care. He would have been talking about all of those things that were in the 10-point program. But that's not what the Black Panther Party talked about from that point on. And from that point on, that's when Elaine Brown took over the Black Panther Party. And that became 70%, 75% Black Panther Party that was female, that was running around talking about, these different programs with a heart and soul of the Panther Party and all of this stuff. And that's the legacy.
By the way, I did hear from Dr. Farmer, who is often cited with that citation, and she's not interested in revisiting that particular topic. She's got new work she's interested in coming on to talk about. So I do have the book, and I'll continue to look through it. So maybe there is some methodology that she shares to reach that conclusion, even with your point about it being post Elaine Brown and whatever. But I'm still very interested in the methodology on how that was determined.
But you do understand
critical, but even just to know how they would, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
But you do understand what I mean by how
yes.
that could be. That the survival pending revolution seemed like, and would seem like, the academia that would come in the Black Studies programs afterwards, analyzing the party, that the Huey Newton faction in them were the rational part of the party. And they were talking about, survival programs of Black people until revolution. Pending revolution. Now, when would revolution come? In that's the zombie apocalypse. I mean, that's what the revolution is. Meanwhile,
go ahead.
Meanwhile, what we were saying, was that we had to take control or render or neutralize the armed agents of the state in our community. That the police and the police unions, the police were not workers. They were armed agents of the state, just like the military. They were, and at the same time, they had their hierarchy and their leadership appointed by the mayor, you understand, who may or may not represent the interests of the majority of people in that particular urban locale because of the two-party system and all of this stuff. You see what I'm saying? So what did we talk about in New York? What did we do? We called together a national conference to combat fascism in, I believe it was 1970 or 69, 70. And thousands of radicals came from all over the country, okay? And the Black Panther Party laid out a program called the National Committees to Combat Fascism, where each city, each locale would go back and organize a chapter of the NCCF. And they would begin working with the electoral system to get on the ballot community control of police, decentralization of police, to set up community public safety boards, okay? And every time we waged that struggle, the struggle was co-opted by bootlickers and Negroes who got on the side of the Democratic Party and the neoliberals and the PBA and the police agencies to talk about what we really mean is that civilians should have more say so in processing complaints against cops. So they came up with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, totally toothless, had no types of power. And we know what the results of that has been for the past 40 or 50 years, okay? Murder after murder, killing after killing, cops getting away with all types of brutality and murder, talking about they're afraid for their lives. You know, there's a certain clause, you understand, that they could claim, you know, when they shoot somebody 15 times and all of these things, you see. And now they come up with computers and algorithms and data to show how heavy-handed policing in one particular locale because of hijacking of cars or street crime or broken windows can be alleviated if we put more cops on the street and saturate the area with this and do that, and we put more surveillance cameras in. So we live in a police state now. We have no control over our surveillance or over the monitoring or even over the complete cutting off of our community from the outside by law enforcement under the guise of a national emergency. You see? So we have to wrest back this control that was meant to be ours based on what the white slave masters said in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. We need to control the armed agents of the state. They work for us. We pay their taxes. They are not workers. So they need to have their unions decertified and their status reconstituted. That's not to say they shouldn't enjoy special considerations because they are armed agents of the state, okay? But at the same time, they should not be treated like they are an emergency nurses union or they're a healthcare union. They're not. They have the power of life and death over us. And we see all the ne'er-do-wells and cowards that have taken those tests and become cops and murder people. You see, we see the trips that they go on a just stop and routine stop, traffic stop. You see? So there's no real training, there's no real screening for these individuals who have the power of life and death, but they're over us, but they're protected by a whole host of union rights and bills and stuff. And you can't fire them if they get let go from one agency. You know, they still have their certificate of law enforcement and they can work at another agency, even though they committed a murder in the county next door. You see, all of these things. Because the United States has become a police state. And right now, there is no pushback against this. There is no pushback on the legal level, and there's no pushback on the electoral level against this. And this is coming at a crucial time. You see.
So I'm trying to we do have a little bit of a time issue because we got to make way for Warrior class at 1 o'clock. And there's a couple of other things that I want to raise here from this episode and from these documents that we're talking a little bit about here. I don't know exactly what order to go in, but just very quickly, I just wanted to show that just did some of what you're talking about. This is the FBI talking about their goals in promoting dissension between the Newton and Cleaver factions, writing letters nominally from other members in the party, warning Huey, and talking about a source that is supposed to be keeping tabs on you, Dhoruba, in terms of where your whereabouts are under the threat that you're trying to assassinate Huey. I mean, all this stuff. I mean, it's. But there's one. I do want to come back. You know what? I'll just ask you now, a little bit out of order. You know, these documents mention Zaid Shakur, and I noticed that even in reference to Asada, you know, in passing, they don't mention Zaid. They don't mention Sundiata Acoli. They don't mention anything about why she was caught, what she was doing when she was caught, why she would have been escaped, how she none of that is mentioned in the series. They just passingly refer to Assata Shakur escaping. So I thought maybe I'd ask you, since his name comes up in these documents and is obviously connected, if you could say a word about Zaid, noted here as the Deputy Minister of Information in New York City. Just to add a little bit more to, and then obviously to ask you, to repeat, the story of where you were when Assata was freed. And then there's a couple other things I would want to bring up from these, but yeah.
But first of all, Zaid Shakur.
Zaid, sorry, yeah.
Zaid Shakur was Lumumba Shakur's brother.
Right.
And he was the deputy minister of information for the New York chapter. But see, Zaid wasn't named in the 21 indictment. There's other people that were named in the 21 indictment as co-conspirators that you don't know about, but if you really did go into depth, you see this, I think there's about 6 or 7, and they were let go in the first day or so of the after the raids, and then you'll see members that sort of like not, you ask yourself, well, how did they wind up, one of the 21? And that's like Curtis Powell, Dr. Curtis Powell, whose specialty was anti-malarial tropical disease treatment. There was, what's his name? From the Lower East Side, Bob Collier, who was a wonderful community organizer on the Lower East Side during the whole period of the hippie movement and housing squatters movement and all of this stuff. He organized a lot of Latinos on the Lower East Side. He was a good community organizer. And so, they weren't like, cadre members of the party as such, like the majority of us. You feel what I'm saying? But they were, heavily involved in the community work that we were trying to do, and there were relationships between us. Okay, so you have to understand too, and it's in the thing that I'm writing that I'm going to give you about this period, that one of the things that I noticed when they raided our spots and we were on our way downtown, that they were sorely disappointed. They were all amped up, but they was really, really disappointed. We're getting ready to get an African rain.
Oh.
Yeah.
Does that mean the electricity's about to go out?
I got a generator.
Okay.
Yeah, it could mean that.
Yeah.
It could mean that the rain will come down and start pouring and pouring and pouring, and then when it stops, now you see the electricity went out.
See? Wow.
You see?
Yep. Right on.
Hey, baby, put the generator on. Hurry up. Hurry up. Hurry up before my hot spot gets cold. Come on.
Yeah.
Come
I love
on.
it. I love it.
Come on.
This is I think this is perfect. And I do think, as was noted by somebody in the chat, first of all, thank you, Adna Salam, for the super chat. Appreciate you. And for Dhoruba.
Oh, Sister Adanya. Hey, salam alaikum, sister. Yeah, so that's a wonderful sister there, man. There's the generator here. Kick it in.
I hear it. Kick it in. Yeah.
All right, flip the switch. Now you see, you're a useless dog. If you should know how to go flip the switch, I got a borrowable puppy. The 5-month-old puppy.
Oh,
There we
right
go.
on.
What?
There it goes. Can't
That's
stop
right.
this.
You can't stop this. Ass out south of the Sahara on the eve of Armageddon, right? All right, baby. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate you.
Everything we came back on TV, everything.
Everything's on there.
Yeah. So I was saying,
yeah.
so I was saying that you know when people try to put together, like I was talking about compacted timelines. People think the things that were happening in Tupac's life when he was going through this crisis were simultaneously or right on the tail end of what was happening. Fanny trying to negotiate the trauma of what she was going through, and these are like 20 years apart. You see what I'm saying? And so,
Well, the way the series is trying to, I'm sympathetic to this. I mean, the series I think is trying to point out that in the sort of the downward spiral, what they're trying to say, I don't agree with, but I'm at least sensitive to what they're saying about its impact on Pac. They're trying to set the stage for, look, the movement. The way I took it is that the movement can't be trusted. It's going to always let you down because they do not go into any of the context we're trying to add here in terms of infiltration, COINTELPRO. They don't give it any serious, meaningful inclusion or discussion. It's just left with that signature quote of "Don't trust the people. They'll always let you down," and then which gives license to this. Here comes Suge Knight to drag Tupac out of any potential radicalism. His mother's going more and more into drugs. Her attempts to stay in some form of the movement keep failing, in part because of her own shortcomings, in part because of the movement's shortcomings, the people's shortcomings. Nothing about the state. And then because of all of this, Pac is growing up. He's growing up in the aftermath of the Panther 21. He's growing up in this devolving state of his mother's condition and the movement's condition. So he's 10 years old when Brinks happens, and his I don't know what they're trying to say, that I guess because Afeni had a relationship with Matulu, that she's somehow mysteriously involved in the redistribution of the money, but not to Pac or to themselves. She's all about the people almost too much. And then they bounce to Baltimore and then out to Oakland, and then he's a gangster. And then in the next episode, he's going to get killed. And that's basically it. So that's why, again, I think what we're trying to do here is very important, because this context, I think, is essential to understanding what happened to his mother and to the movement and everything else that would have left him and my generation without the necessary context or conditions to carry on the struggle at the height and the level that you all did. And I know that's, again, where you and I think, may slightly disagree still, but at least that's my interpretation very quickly of what was happening.
I don't think I disagree with how
Okay.
that could. I don't think that I disagree with how that could lead you up the river without a paddle. What I was trying to say is that the results, the consequences that you have just outlined was intentional.
Correct.
I mean,
they don't make that clear in the series. That's to me what is so important.
None of the series are ever going to make that clear, because if it made that clear, that meant what? That the Congressional Black Caucus, as it was formed and how it has now become, was a plan to do exactly what it is doing now. Nothing. Okay.
Excuse my interruption. One more time, D. Sorry, but
Message.
just throw that in there.
Please keep going. I mean, does the war on poverty that has produced these so-called black capitalists who believe that the road to liberation lies in fiscal,
Financial literacy.
financial literacy, and holding on to keeping the dollar bouncing around in the black community. You know, does it fall on the, does does it take in the reparations movement that that doesn't want to embrace or even deal with reparations in the context of the historical development of African people in America as a domestic colony? You know, and therefore the reparations would have to assume the dimensions of national liberation. It would have to assume the dimensions of decolonization. It would have to assume the dimensions of anti-apartheid separation of political and I mean we're talking about a whole lot of stuff, you know, but we ain't talking about that now when we talk about reparations. We talk about who's supposed to get it, what form it's supposed to be in, you know, whether we should have it on.
How big is that check?
You know, yeah. Do you have your great grandmother's footprint? You understand? and say, look, my aunt Jemima was on the pancake box. You see what I'm saying? And so I get some check. You see, so I'm saying, and I mean, and this goes even further when we look at Africa and we look at the time now when black people have all of the most prolific representation of black faces in high places in elected office in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and look at U.S. policy towards Africa, and look who they send to Africa and what message she brings to Africa. They sent Kamala Harris to Africa with that Mickey Mouse message, you know, don't trust the Chinese. You understand what I'm saying? And you could trust us though, you know. Oh, Lumumba, you know, my bad.
Yeah, I did want you to go back because I think we got interrupted on the point of Zaid. I did want you to finish up on anything you would want to add about him.
Oh yeah,
and then
yeah.
to come back to that question of connecting to the series reference to Asada of where you were when news of her escape.
Yeah,
broke.
I'll make that simple. Zaid was Lumumba Shakur's brother, and he was. You know, he was slight of build, you know, and he looked like a he looked like a wise scholar, but he was young, you know, and he was in the nationalist movement with his brother for some time. You know, they came out of the Shakur family, you know, a long time Pan-African activists in the Northeast. So, you know, that was Zaid. Now, how Zaid ended up the way it ended up, we would have to unravel the fault line in the split of the Black Panther Party, how that affected certain chapters and NCCF chapters, and like people didn't fully appreciate that the Upper Manhattan chapter, from which Frank Fields and other BLA members emerged, was not actually a chapter of the party. It was an NCCF chapter.
Mm.
And you see, that's why I was explaining how the Black Panther Party took its role as leadership, as left leadership very seriously, because it felt that the rise of the police state needed to be combated, and the only way to combat that was to create a united front against fascism, where the left and all its different persuasions would come together on a principle basis and agree that capitalism was consolidating the anti-democratic forces in the country around electoral politics, around the police, around the repression, around the war in Vietnam, and what we needed was a united front. You see. Now, how relevant is that today? And you can see that the Black Panther Party, therefore, when I say that when Huey says that survival pending revolution, the Black Panther Party would have never took that position based on that proposition.
Damn.
You see?
Yeah, no, I
Because you're talking about a Black Panther Party that called together a united front because it had the respect of the radical white left. It had the respect of the global peace movement. It had the respect of the Black working class movement. It had the respect of the militant Black power movement. It had the respect of the grassroots street movement. And it claimed to be the legitimate heirs of Malcolm X. So we wasn't talking about no survival pending revolution. We was talking about revolution as survival. You see? And that's why you see a lot of times you hear the OGs talk about that time, and we be talking about how, yeah, it looked like the struggle we was going to win was right around the corner. Right? So we wasn't talking about, yeah, maybe, baby. We wasn't talking about how long, not long. We wasn't talking about that. You see? We were talking about, what was the slogan back then? Now. Freedom. When do you want it? Now. Not pending, not our survival as second-class citizens pending revolution. And to show you the fallacy of that position, we are still fighting around voting access to the polls and voting rights today. And we have won the voting rights bill back in what, 64 sometime? So what are we doing still fighting the same fights, fighting the same struggles that we've already won? How we wind up fighting that? You have a whole generation fighting the same struggles that we've already won. And that's why I tell these young people, you're out of touch with your radical history and your radical traditions. That's why you're repeating the same battle. Whereas the enemy has institutional memory. They have records they can go to. They can see, when these Negroes came out talking that community control, this is how we flipped it on them, What are you going to do without the police? Who you going to call? And what we said back then, what are you going to do if they say, well, who are we going to call when you call 911? You're going to call us, the Black Panther Party. You see? Because ain't we here? Ain't we them? Who are we if we ain't them? You see? So that survival pending revolution was a capitulation to the rise of the consolidation of right-wing racist police power. That's what it was. It was a backward step.
So again, we'll double back and maybe I'll invite you to do a whole separate discussion on the context that put Zaid on the turnpike. We'll do that maybe another time. But let's talk about real quick where you were given this reference to Asada passingly in episode 4. Where were you when news broke of her escape?
I was in the police. I was wedged between two beefy ass what they call that, Old Spice smelling, cigar smelling crackers from the Joint Terrorist Task Force on one side, New York, NYPD, 2 up in the front, had escort car up there, state trooper, 1 behind, and then they maybe had little helicopters, and I was on my way from Napanock State Prison down to court on my COINTELPRO suit, and they asked me, they said that I was coming down, and I should only bring the documents that pertain to my case. I couldn't carry that down. And when they told me that a few days before, I gave away everything to everybody. Tell them that was it. I'm out of here, you know. And they thought I was crazy, right? And so I was on my way to MCC in New York when the news came over the police intercom that Chesimard had been had breaking news on Chesimard had escaped from the custody of such and such and such. You understand? As far as they knew, you know, there was a number of officers that were injured, perhaps killed. You know, they had all this stuff in the beginning. You know, they didn't say, but you should have seen it. You should have seen these crackers in this. And I was like that because I'm handcuffed to my waist, right? And my feet are shackled and I'm handcuffed. So I'm sitting like this, right? And this cracker's sitting here and other ones sitting there. And they, you know, and they kind of thick, right? So I'm sitting there. And when that came over the radio, I said, could you turn that up? Just, I leave. I said, could you turn that up, right? And the dude that was driving, he mumbled some old shit about it's loud enough, you know. So, but they couldn't help themselves. They said, "That's that Chesimard." I thought, what fucking place? What? How did that happen? You know. So that's where I was. And so I got down to MCC and I stayed there for 3 years, almost 3 years, and I got 300,000 pages of FBI files. And thanks to two black women who were the first black women on the Southern District Court bench, Constance Baker Motley and Mary Johnson Love. Both of those sisters refused to let my case go. When, you know, because when the newest person comes into the district, they get the oldest case, or they get the cases, you know, everybody dumps on them, but they wouldn't dump mine.
Wow,
and when
right
they
on.
Busted, and when Mary Johnson Love, I believe, busted the U.S. attorney lying to her, it was a wrap. They was wheeling in documents for the next year in milk crates, in grocery carts.
Oh wow!
For me to read, I had to read them all. You know, first they said they didn't have nothing. All they had was my criminal file, and that therefore the case should be summarily dismissed. But my lawyers had a friend who was working on the Fred Hampton case, the Fred Hampton suit in Chicago. And lo and behold, in discovery, they got these COINTELPRO files with guess whose name on it. So they sent it to my attorneys, who sent it to Mary Johnson Lowe. And when she read that, she summoned the U.S. attorney and my attorney up to the bench, and she said, "What is this?" And they went to blah, blah, blah. Just the first time I'm seeing this, Your Honor. I wouldn't know what does this say at the top? Federal Bureau of Investigation. That's you guys, ain't it? And that was it. She said, "You're going to turn over everything." So I got files from national headquarters, from New York, and eventually it was the information in these files that showed that the state knew what they were doing when they put me on trial and convicted me. They knew that it was a setup. So,
Listen, we in the time remaining, there's one more point I'd like to raise with you for today, and then obviously we'll keep this going. You know, um, beyond today. But one thing that I noted in the documents that Bob Boyle sent is this line here, and I thought it would be a good way of ending this part of the discussion, because it is a reminder of, I think, the context in which I like to, at least consider all of these media products. So I just thought it was interesting that it says here that the Bureau requested to furnish essence of above data to source in national media. And my point in all of that is just as a reminder that the FBI, the state, has a very incestuous relationship with mainstream media, with the press, and has a long history of using that to get its version, its narratives out. And I don't think it's inappropriate to raise that in the context of this Hulu product, for what it's doing, and why I, again, appreciate that we can have these conversations with you and others. So I just really wanted to bring that point up. And there are many other things that I know we could get into, but just in terms of time for today, I just wanted to at least raise that for us to consider briefly, and give you any chance, anything, give you time to respond and to sort of wrap up for today in any way that you'd like.
That incestuous relationship with the mass media, I think you brought it out in the series that y'all did a couple of weeks ago on Carl McEwen's Global Village, and how the media.
Marshall McLuhan, right? With
But I think that with the current
US,
with the current U.S. repression against the African People's Socialist Party down in Florida, and talking about how they are somehow part and parcel of a Russian cabal to influence U.S. Opinion, they're projecting. They're really projecting. That's what their so-called philanthropic organizations do. They project the Israel's position, and any criticism of them therefore becomes anti-Semitic. It's their philanthropic organizations that are supplying care packages only to the reactionaries in the occupied territories. You see, so we should understand that this incestuous relationship between the media and how we perceive events, how we understand the things that are happening to us today, is an indication why it's very important to support Black Power media, to develop and bring up our own truth tellers and storytellers, to tell our own version of history and our own version of events in our radical history. Because the reason why we have to do this around a movie that depicts public figures that mean something to a lot of people, is because of the ability of the mass media and cinema and to mold our understanding of reality, our understanding of our history. And so we only can act according to what we understand or what we misunderstand. So it's very important for us.
Oh man, D, there's a slick part in this last episode, and for those who have seen it, feel free to check me on this, but there's this real slick part, right? One of the underlying themes in the story, in the dominant narrative of Pac, is that he was caught up in an East Coast West Coast beef that others have compared to the East Coast West Coast beef developed and spurred on by the FBI in terms of the Panther Party. And there's a brief mention. First of all, Dr. Burroughs sent me some reminder. I should mention here that one of the reasons why Kevin Powell is not in this documentary series is because he had previously sued so many others involved for having misused his own work in previous history in interviewing Pac. But he himself had been at one point condemned for participating in the media narrative that created this false idea of a real beef between the coasts. But anyway, I say all that to say that there's this real slick part where the series in episode 4 is trying to make this point that, again, they're talking about the friendship between Pac and Snoop. And they're talking about a moment where Suge Knight has taken over Death Row, and Death Row has taken over the industry, and it's becoming it's filled with thugs and gangsters, and Dre's in there talking about he's scared to go to the studio, or it's a struggle just to get to the studio because there's all this thuggery going on. And Pac's getting caught up in all of this, and Dre leaves Death Row, and Snoop wants to leave Death Row, but he feels like he can't. And then they start talking about what Snoop feels like he's being threatened and distanced from Pac, and being threatened by Suge, and all this and all this other stuff. And there's a scene where they're showing an interview where Pac and Snoop are sitting next to each other. And it's an old interview where Pac is doing most of the talking, and you see Snoop, and they're trying to frame him as looking afraid and timid, and they're zooming in on Snoop as the interviewer is talking to Pac. And if you pay attention, I actually went back and played it twice. If you pay attention and listen very closely, because they want you to hear the narration of Snoop and not what Pac is saying in the original interview. But while Snoop is narrating this part saying, I'm trying to get away from all this, and Pac's going into it, you hear Pac saying to the interviewer something to the effect that you, the media, are pushing this beef between the coasts, when it's really not that. And we're really not animals and thugs and looking to be violent against one another. You all are pushing that. But as he's saying that, it gets faded out under Snoop's narration, which is looking to emphasize the gangsterism and the Suge Knight influence and Pac's devolution and the absence of a movement and all this other stuff, with no discussion of COINTELPRO, no discussion of the state or their interference in any way whatsoever. So anyway, I just thought it was a fascinating moment that to me said a lot about what I think is going on here, and support and I think also supports much of what you've just said there. But anyway, I'll stop there and give you can.
Well, I'm going to concede that much of this stuff happened while in terms of Tupac growing up and all that stuff. I was on lockdown. This is why I said that I didn't want to bring my type of observations based on the history that I went through to this young man's growth and growing up essentially in the same environment I grew up in, but his reaction to that environment and the circumstances and the conditions were completely different than when I came up. So I understand how you talked about the devolution of consciousness and activism, and I just wanted to point out that was intentional from the very beginning, to disconnect one generation's struggles and successes from another generation, so that they refight and rebrand the same old struggles and the same old fights. We still fighting the same old shit. And these crackers that moved on to a whole nother level of instituting minority rule, forever, no matter what the vote is. They already did it with the electoral college system and the winner take all of that system. The founding fathers did that so the masses wouldn't take their property and wouldn't knock them out of positions of power. So now that the electoral college system has proved that it's nothing but a dictatorship of the rich, it's a plutocracy, it's the plutocratic form of government, people are talking about maybe we should abolish the electoral college system and we should have direct vote, popular vote, you see. But that'll take a certain amount of votes to reconstitute the Constitution. But guess what? The Black Panther Party held a constitutional convention in Philadelphia in 1970, precisely to rewrite certain amendments in the Constitution Not only did we call for a united front against fascism almost a year earlier, but that time we called the same movements, the anti-war movement, and the movements that were then talking about starting a third political party, and say that if we got together and we weighed in with the radical left and the progressive movements in the United States, because this was clearly the writing was on the wall in the Vietnam War. Okay, this was a unique opportunity for us to at least begin to organize in local municipalities about constitutional amendments. You see, so this whole discussion about race in the nativity of this republic would have been had then on a whole different level, but it was co-opted by this incestuous relationship between the state and the armed agents of the state and the mass media and the institutional media. So well, that's all. It was intentional.
No, man. Hey, listen, it's always an honor to get to rap with you, and we'll continue to do it as much as possible. So I just want to thank you. Thanks, of course, to Tanakil and anyone else involved in supporting this. And we wish you well, man, and look forward to coming back for more. I appreciate you, and look forward, everything, yeah. All right, Dhoruba, well, stay safe, man. Stay dry out there now. Keep that generator charged up, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, man. Peace.
Thank you very much. Peace. Oh, man, people. It really is an honor. We really are lucky to get to be able to rap with Dhoruba. I appreciate him taking the time and joining us. And to those who were able to join us here live today, thank you as well. And to those who will see this here later, appreciate you. Thanks again for the super chats. Sister Salam, S. Barros, thank you. Accurate representation of radical history, critically necessary. An honor to hear Dhoruba, absolutely. I did catch this from Big Pun. This is good. I'm looking forward to this reissue. Yeah. And then, of course, for me, the highlight would have to be what Dhoruba said earlier. We weren't talking survival pending revolution. We were talking revolution as survival. I think that's an important distinction. So big shout out to Dhoruba. Thanks, everybody, for coming through. We're gonna make way for Baba Balagoon. I'm about to go stretch and get ready for this warrior class. I can't think of a better way to proceed to set the stage for warrior class and to talk to a legit warrior in this way. So let's do it. Peace, everybody. If, like Fred Hampton, you are willing to fight for it, and we will catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like and throughout the BPM platform. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, ring that bell so you don't miss anything. Catch you next time. Thanks a lot. Peace.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.